They told me to use the loading dock because drivers didn't deserve the front entrance. The new chairman laughed as security watched, calling me a relic who belonged in the past. I simply nodded, closed the limousine door, and drove away without saying a word. Minutes later, sitting alone behind the wheel, I opened an old leather document case hidden beneath my seat. Inside rested a single certificate with my signature still untouched after 45 years. The company's golden share. They believed they had just humiliated an old chauffeur. They had no idea they had just humiliated the only man who could legally stop everything they were about to do.
Before I tell you how that happened, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. If stories about dignity, justice, and second chances speak to your heart, I hope you'll like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these journeys together. And tell me honestly in the comments, if someone treated you like you were invisible, would you quietly walk away? Or wait until the truth revealed itself? My name is George Carter, though almost nobody inside Carter and Hamilton Industries recognised it anymore. To the executives on the 42nd floor, I was simply George from transportation, an elderly substitute driver with silver hair, a faded black cap, and hands that trembled slightly whenever the Chicago winter settled into my joints. They saw the uniform before they saw the man inside it. That was exactly what I wanted.
45 years earlier, there had been no glass headquarters, no private elevators, and no fleet of polished black limousines. There had only been William Hamilton and me standing inside a freezing warehouse on the south side with one borrowed desk, two folding chairs, and a furnace that worked only when William kicked it.
William was everything I was not. He could walk into a room filled with skeptical bankers and make them believe the impossible was already happening. He had a warm smile, a strong handshake, and a gift for remembering every person's name. Investors trusted him. Reporters loved him. Employees wanted to follow him. I preferred machines to microphones.
While William raised money and negotiated contracts, I designed our first distribution system, repaired damaged equipment, trained warehouse crews, and drove delivery trucks when someone called in sick. I knew which factory doors froze during winter. I knew which foremen treated their workers fairly. I knew which families depended on every hour of overtime. William became the face of the company. I became its foundation.
We never resented each other for that difference, at least not in those early years. We were more like brothers than business partners. He understood that I did not want cameras, and I understood that the company needed someone willing to stand in front of them. Our first major contract came from a regional hospital network that needed emergency transportation equipment delivered across 3 states. A winter storm shut down the highways the night before the deadline. William wanted to postpone the delivery, but I knew the hospitals were depending on us. I drove through the storm myself. When I returned 2 days later, exhausted and barely able to feel my fingers, William was waiting at the warehouse with every employee. He hugged me in front of them and said, "This company will never become the kind of place that forgets who carries the weight." For years we lived by that promise. As the company grew, we created scholarship funds for employees' children. We paid factory workers during shutdowns. We required safety inspections even when competitors called them unnecessary. We opened training centres in neighbourhoods other corporations had abandoned. Those decisions cost money. They also created loyalty no advertisement could buy. By the time Carter and Hamilton Industries became one of the largest transportation and manufacturing companies in the Midwest, William and I had already begun worrying about what would happen after we were gone. Success changes people. Sometimes it changes the people who earn it. More often it changes the people who inherit it. One night after a board dinner, William and I sat alone in his office overlooking the Chicago River. He had poured himself a glass of bourbon, but he did not drink it. He simply stared at the lights below us. "What happens when someone comes along who sees all this as a pile of assets?" he asked. I knew exactly what he meant. Factories could be sold, pension funds could be cut, employees could be reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. A company built through sacrifice could be dismantled by someone who had never missed a meal to make payroll. That was when we created the Golden Share. It was not made of gold, despite the name. It was a legal instrument written into the company's founding protections. It carried almost no financial value, but it held extraordinary authority. If Carter and Hamilton ever attempted a sale merger restructuring or policy change that violated its founding mission, the holder of the Golden Share could stop the decision with a single veto. Only 3 people knew the complete truth: William, our longtime attorney Margaret Collins, and me. William insisted I should hold it. "You are the one person who never wanted power," he told me. "That is exactly why you should have it." I laughed at him then. I told him he was being dramatic. Years later I understood that he had been afraid. When I retired, I disappeared more completely than anyone expected. I moved to a quiet house near Lake Michigan, spent mornings repairing old radios, and volunteered twice a week at a community workshop for teenagers. William remained involved in the company, though his health slowly declined. Then 6 years ago, he died.
At his funeral, the church was filled with executives, politicians, former employees, and members of the Hamilton family. I sat near the back. Several people spoke about William's vision. Others praised his leadership. Almost no one mentioned the promises we had made together. After the service, William's grandson approached me.
Nathan Hamilton was 34, then handsome, confident, and dressed in a suit that probably cost more than our first warehouse rent. William had loved him deeply. I remembered Nathan as a little boy racing toy trucks across the carpet of the executive office, but the man standing before me seemed impatient. "You worked with my grandfather, didn't you?" he asked. "For a long time," I said. He nodded politely, already looking past me towards someone more important. That moment stayed with me, not because he failed to recognize me, but because he had no desire to learn. When Nathan was appointed chairman, business magazines celebrated him as the new face of American industry. His photograph appeared beneath headlines about innovation, modernization, and bold leadership. Then the letters began arriving. At first, there were only two. One came from a factory supervisor in Indiana who had worked for the company for 28 years. He wrote that experienced employees were being forced out and replaced with temporary labor. The other came from the widow of a former warehouse manager. Her husband's medical support had been reduced after his death despite promises made under Williams' administration. Soon more letters followed. Safety inspections were being shortened, community programs were disappearing. Employees were afraid to speak. I could have walked into headquarters carrying the golden share and demanded answers, but the moment people recognized me, they would change their behavior. Nathan would prepare speeches, directors would hide documents, managers would suddenly remember how to smile at workers. I did not want a performance. I wanted the truth.
Through an old friend in fleet management, I learned the executive transportation department needed temporary drivers. I submitted an application using only the employment history from my younger years and a shortened version of my resume. Nobody looked closely. Why would they? To them, I was a 76-year-old widower looking for part-time work.
During my first week, a receptionist named Denise brought me coffee because she noticed I had skipped lunch. A young mechanic stayed late to fix the heater in my assigned vehicle. A janitor warned me which elevator doors closed too quickly. The workers were still kind. The executives were different. They discussed layoffs while I sat 3 feet away. They mocked aging employees in the back seat of my car. They complained that the company's pension obligations were preventing real growth.
They never lowered their voices around me. Invisible people hear everything. By the time Nathan humiliated me at the loading dock, I had already spent 3 weeks observing the company we had built, and each day one terrible truth became harder to deny. Carter and Hamilton Industries still carried our names on the building, but its soul was slowly being removed from the inside.
The first official sign that Nathan Hamilton intended to destroy everything William and I had built came on a Monday morning. I had been assigned to drive him from his downtown apartment to headquarters. He entered the limousine without greeting me, pressed his phone against his ear, and immediately began speaking to someone named Victor. "Make the announcement before the market opens," he said. "I want the board to understand that hesitation is over." I kept my eyes on the road. Drivers learn quickly that silence makes powerful people careless. Nathan leaned back against the leather seat and continued. 800 positions in the first phase. Most of them have been here more than 15 years, so the severance exposure will be high. Find a way to classify the eliminations as operational consolidation. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. 800 positions. He said the number as casually as if he were discussing office chairs. When we arrived at headquarters, employees were already gathering around the monitors in the lobby. Nathan's announcement appeared on every screen. A new era of efficiency and growth. The words were clean and optimistic. The reality beneath them was not. 3 manufacturing facilities would be consolidated. 2 employee training centers would close. Administrative departments would be reduced. Long-time workers would be offered early retirement packages that expired within 14 days. Anyone who refused would risk being dismissed without the same benefits. I stood near the transportation desk and watched people read the announcement. A payroll clerk covered her mouth with both hands. A maintenance supervisor stared at the screen without blinking. A woman named Linda Parker, who had worked in quality control for 31 years, whispered, "My husband is still going through treatment. I cannot lose our insurance." No executive came down to answer questions. By noon, Nathan had ordered catered lunch for the board. The following week, the Employee Appreciation Program was cancelled. William and I had created that program after our 10th anniversary. Every year, employees who reached major service milestones were invited to dinner with their families. It was never about expensive gifts. It was about looking a worker in the eye and telling them their years mattered. Nathan called it sentimental waste. The annual family picnic disappeared next. Then the scholarship fund for employees' children was suspended. Nathan's office issued a statement saying the money would be redirected towards strategic modernisation. But I had seen the preliminary budget while waiting outside a conference room. The so-called modernisation included renovations to the executive floor, a private dining room, and a digital wall displaying Nathan's public appearances. The cruelty was not limited to financial decisions.
During one afternoon drive, I transported Nathan and Chief Operating Officer Bradley Shaw to a regional management meeting. Bradley had been with the company for only 3 years, but he spoke about veteran workers as if they were broken equipment. The older supervisors resist every change, Bradley said. They keep talking about the Carter and Hamilton way. Nathan laughed.
My grandfather built a respectable company, but he was too attached to people. Loyalty is useful until it becomes expensive. I felt something cold settle in my chest. William had spent his final years believing Nathan would eventually understand responsibility. He had kept a photograph of his grandson on his desk until the day he died. Nathan continued speaking. We need managers who are hungry, not people counting the days until retirement. Bradley lowered his voice, though there was no reason to. Neither man believed I mattered. What about the safety division reduce inspection frequency? Nathan replied. Quarterly instead of monthly. The plant directors will object, then replace them. Our safety inspections had never been negotiable. Years earlier, a machine malfunction at our first plant had nearly killed a young father named Robert Miles. He survived because another worker recognized the warning signs and shut down the line. Afterward, William and I created one of the strictest internal inspection systems in the industry. Nathan intended to dismantle it to improve quarterly margins. I almost turned around and confronted him. Almost. But anger would have revealed too much too soon. I needed to know the full plan.
The workers began disappearing one by one. Linda Parker accepted early retirement because she was afraid of losing her husband's medical coverage. A plant manager named Thomas Reed was removed after he refused to shorten safety checks. Denise, the receptionist who had brought me coffee during my first week, told me her sister's scholarship application had been cancelled without explanation. Every evening I returned home carrying stories I could not forget.
I kept the golden share certificate inside a locked cabinet in my study. Sometimes I would sit before it for an hour, wondering whether I had already seen enough. But the golden share was never meant to settle ordinary disagreements. It was created for a threat that could permanently destroy the company's mission. I still needed proof. That proof came during a late-night drive 3 weeks after the restructuring announcement. Nathan Bradley and a man I had never seen before entered the limousine outside a private restaurant near the Chicago River. The stranger wore a navy overcoat and carried a leather portfolio stamped with the initials BC. Nathan introduced him as Victor Lang, Senior Managing Director of Blackridge Capital. I recognized the name immediately.
Blackridge specialized in buying established companies, dividing their assets, selling valuable properties, and eliminating whatever remained. They called it unlocking value. Employees called it losing everything. Nathan raised the privacy partition halfway, but not fully. He seemed to believe that was enough. Victor opened his portfolio. Once the acquisition is approved, Blackridge will control the manufacturing assets, real estate holdings, and pension restructuring, he said.
Bradley asked, how quickly can the facilities be separated within 18 months? The Indiana and Wisconsin plants can be sold individually. The Ohio facility will likely close. My heart began pounding. Thousands of workers depended on those plants. Nathan did not sound troubled, and my position. You remain chairman through the transition. Your compensation package increases after shareholder approval. Blackridge will also support your nomination to 2 outside boards.
There it was. He was not saving the company. He was selling its people for status. Bradley asked whether the founding bylaws could create problems. Victor hesitated. Our legal team found references to an unusual protective share created during incorporation. The records are incomplete. Nathan dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. My grandfather collected ceremonial documents. Whatever that share was, it has not been used in decades.
It may still carry veto authority, Victor warned. Nathan laughed. Then find the owner. I watched him through the rearview mirror. For one brief moment his eyes met mine. He saw only an elderly driver. The original owners are dead or irrelevant, he said. No one is stopping this deal. I looked back at the road and said nothing. The next morning I noticed a young attorney standing near the executive elevators with a stack of old corporate files in her arms. Her name was Emily Foster. She had joined the legal department only 18 months earlier. I knew little about her except that she always thanked drivers and greeted cleaning staff by name. As I passed, several papers slipped from her folder. I bent down to help her collect them. One page carried a heading I had not seen in years. Founding Protective Authority. Emily quickly turned it over. Thank you, George, she said, but her expression had changed. She glanced toward the security cameras, then lowered her voice. Have you ever heard anyone mention something called a golden share? I looked into her eyes. She was not asking from curiosity. She was afraid. Before I could answer, Bradley Shaw stepped out of the elevator. Emily immediately gathered the remaining papers and walked away. Bradley watched her go, then looked at me. What did she ask you? Directions to the parking garage, I replied.
He studied my face for several seconds. Then he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. That evening, as I drove home, I understood two things clearly. Emily Foster had discovered that the golden share existed, and someone inside Carter and Hamilton Industries was already watching her. I did not answer Emily Foster that day. Not because I did not trust her, but because trust, like everything else inside Carter and Hamilton, had become something dangerous when placed in the wrong hands.
Instead, I watched. Over the next several days, Emily moved differently through the building. She no longer carried files openly. She avoided the main legal department and began using a small conference room on the 29th floor that most executives had forgotten existed. She arrived early, stayed late, and always seemed to glance over her shoulder before entering elevators. Someone had already made her nervous.
And when good people become afraid inside a company, it means something is already broken. 3 days after our brief conversation, I was scheduled to drive a senior compliance officer to O'Hare Airport. As I waited outside the building, I noticed two men I had never seen before standing near the employee entrance. They wore dark suits but did not carry identification badges. They were not executives, they were not employees. They were observers. When Emily exited the building, they both turned their heads slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough for someone like me to notice. She walked past them without acknowledging their presence, but her grip tightened around the folder she carried. That was the moment I knew. Nathan was not just restructuring the company, he was controlling information. That evening I made a decision I had been delaying since the night in the limousine. I would speak to her, not as a driver, not yet as a founder, but as someone who understood what was at stake. I found her just after 8 o'clock on the 29th floor. Most of the lights were off and the cleaning crew had already moved on to the upper levels. The hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. Her office door was slightly open. I knocked softly. She looked up startled at first, then relieved when she recognized me. "George," she said, "you shouldn't be up here, neither should you," I replied.
For a moment, neither of us spoke, then she closed the door behind me. What did you mean the other day? She asked quietly. When I mentioned the golden share, you low oaked like you knew exactly what it was. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she closed the door behind me. What did you mean the other day? She asked quietly. When I mentioned the golden share, you looked like you knew exactly what it was. I did, I said. Her expression sharpened. I've been reviewing old corporate filings, she continued. There are references to a protective authority embedded in the original charter. But the ownership records are missing. Someone removed them. I know, I said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You know, I know they were removed, I clarified. And I know why. She took a slow breath. Then you understand what this means, she said. If that share is still valid, it could stop the Blackridge acquisition. It can, I said. The words hung in the air between us. For a moment, hope flickered across her face. Then doubt followed.
"But we don't know who holds it," she said, "and if we can't prove its existence before the board vote, Nathan will finalize the deal within weeks." I walked toward the window and looked down at the city lights below. "Emily," I said, "how many people have you told about this?" "No one," she answered immediately. I tried to raise concerns with senior counsel, but they dismissed it. After that I stopped asking questions. "Good," I said. She frowned. "Good."
The fewer people who know, the harder it is for them to stop you. Her shoulders stiffened. You think someone is trying to stop me? I turned to face her. I think someone already is. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out several documents. These are copies of what I've found so far, she said. Most of the original records are gone, but I found references in secondary filings, amendments, legal notes, internal memos. Enough to prove the golden share exists. She hesitated, but not enough to prove who owns it. I studied the papers carefully. She had done more in a week than most legal teams accomplish in months. You're thorough, I said. I'm careful, she corrected. There's a difference. I nodded. Yes, there is. She stepped closer. George, why do you care about this? She asked. Most people in your position would stay out of it. I almost smiled. My position, I repeated. To her, I was still a driver. a man with no stake in the company beyond a paycheck. That was about to change, but not yet. Because I've seen what happens when companies forget why they exist, I said quietly, and I don't want to watch it happen again. She studied my face as if trying to read something deeper. Then she asked the question I'd been expecting. Have you ever met the founders? I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had welded our first assembly line, the same hands that had signed the documents she now held. Yes, I said. Her breath caught slightly. Then you know something, she pressed. Something more than what's in these papers. I know enough, I said. Enough to help me. Enough to tell you that you're in danger. That stopped her. I'm not afraid, she said. Then you're not paying attention, I replied. The silence that followed was heavier than anything we had said. Finally, she exhaled. What do we do? She asked. I walked back toward the desk and placed the documents down carefully. We stopped searching where they expect you to search, I said. The official archives are gone. The digital records have been cleaned. That means we need to go somewhere they didn't think to erase.
Her eyes flickered with realization. The old storage levels, she said. I nodded. Beneath the building, she added. The original archive rooms. Exactly. She hesitated. Those areas are restricted, she said. Access requires executive authorization. I reached into my pocket and removed a small worn keycard. It was faded, the magnetic strip nearly scratched beyond recognition. This used to open every door in the building, I said. Her eyes widened. Used to.
We'll find out. That night, just after midnight, we returned. The building was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, as if even the walls were holding their breath. We avoided the main elevators and used the service corridor near the maintenance wing. The descent took longer than I remembered, 2 floors below ground level, then 3. Finally, we reached a corridor lined with steel doors, each marked with numbers that had long since faded. Emily stepped closer to one of them. Archive B3, she read softly. I swiped the keycard. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft mechanical click, the door unlocked. Emily looked at me in disbelief. How did you? Later, I said. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust covered most of the shelves. Boxes were stacked unevenly, some labelled, others not. Old filing cabinets stood against the walls like forgotten monuments. We moved slowly, carefully. Every sound echoed.
After nearly an hour, Emily found the first significant box. Incorporation records, she whispered. We opened it together. Inside were original documents, contracts, meeting minutes, handwritten notes. Pieces of history. Proof that Carter and Hamilton had once been built by people who cared. But it wasn't enough. We kept searching. Another 30 minutes passed. Then Emily froze. George, she said quietly. I turned. She was holding a sealed envelope.
The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting on the front was still clear. To the board of directors only if the company's soul is ever at risk. My chest tightened. I had not seen that envelope in over 20 years. Open it, I said. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a single document. She read it silently at first, then aloud. It confirms the golden share, she said. Its authority, its purpose, everything. She looked up at me.
But it doesn't name the owner. I nodded slowly. Of course it doesn't. Her expression shifted frustration, confusion, urgency. This proves it exists, she said. But without the owner, we can't use it. I looked at the document in her hands, then at the shelves around us, then back at her. Not yet, I said. She stared at me. Not yet, she repeated. I met her gaze. There's one more piece you need to find, I said quietly. What piece? The truth, I answered.
And somewhere above us, far beyond the concrete and steel, I heard the faint echo of footsteps. We were no longer alone in the building. The footsteps above us did not stop. They slowed. That was worse. People who walk with purpose move quickly. People who slow down are listening. Emily heard it too. Her eyes lifted toward the ceiling, her breath tightening as if the air itself had become thinner. We need to go, she whispered. Not yet, I said quietly. She looked at me in disbelief. George, someone is up there, I know. Then why are we still standing here? Because I had spent 45 years building something that was now being dismantled piece by piece, and I was not leaving this room without understanding exactly how deep the damage went. But I did not say that. Instead, I stepped toward another shelf. 5 more minutes, I said. Then we go. She hesitated, then nodded. Fear and courage often live in the same place. The difference is what you choose to do next. We moved faster now, scanning labels, opening boxes, searching for anything that could connect the golden share to a name. Then I saw it. A small metal lockbox pushed behind a stack of outdated payroll records. No label, no markings. Just a simple, deliberate attempt to hide something important in a place no one would think to look. I pulled it free. Emily stepped closer. Do you think that's... I don't know, I said, but we're about to find out. The lock had already been broken. That told me everything. Someone had been here before us. I opened the box. Inside were documents, but not the ones I expected. Not original charters. Not certificates. Copies. Carefully selected copies of legal amendments, internal memos, and board communications, all related to the Golden Share. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. These were pulled from the official archives, she said, but they weren't destroyed. No, I said. They were studied. She looked at me. You mean someone already knows about the Golden Share? I think someone has known for a long time. The footsteps above us stopped completely. Silence. Then a faint metallic sound. A door opening. Emily grabbed my arm. We have to go now. This time I did not argue. We left the lockbox exactly where we found it and moved quickly toward the corridor. The service elevator was too risky. If someone was already watching the building, they would expect us to use it. Stairs, I said. We found the emergency exit at the end of the hall. The door creaked as we pushed it open, the sound echoing louder than it should have. We climbed. 1 level, 2, 3. By the time we reached ground level, both of us were breathing harder than we wanted to admit. We stepped into the maintenance hallway just as 2 security officers walked past the opposite end. They did not see us, but they were not patrolling randomly. They were searching. Emily pressed her back against the wall. They know, she whispered. Yes, I said. But how? I thought about the lockbox, about the missing records, about the men outside the building, about Bradley Shaw's smile. They've known longer than we have, I said. We exited through the side entrance into the cold Chicago night. The air hit my lungs like a warning. Emily turned to me immediately. That box, those documents, they were collecting information, she said. But why not destroy it? Because they weren't trying to erase the Golden Share, I said slowly. They were trying to control it. Her eyes widened. Control it how? By finding out who owns it. The realization settled between us. They don't know, she said. No, I agreed. But they're getting closer. She ran a hand through her hair, trying to steady herself. Then we're running out of time, she said. If they identify the owner before we can prove it publicly, they'll find a way to discredit them, or worse. She didn't need to finish the sentence. I had seen what power could do when it felt threatened. We need proof, she continued. Something undeniable. Something they can't bury or manipulate. I looked at her. You already have part of it. The envelope. Yes. That only proves the Golden Share exists, she said. Not who holds it. I hesitated. Not because I doubted her, but because the moment I told her the truth, everything would change. For her, for me, for the company. Emily, I said quietly, if you knew who held that authority, what would you do? She didn't hesitate. I would protect them, she said, and I would make sure the board heard the truth before Nathan signs anything. Even if it cost you your career, she held my gaze. Yes. There was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation, just conviction. That was when I knew. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. She reminded me of someone. Not William. Someone else. Someone who had once stood beside me in a freezing warehouse and promised that no matter how large the company became, we would never forget the people who made it possible. I reached into my coat pocket. For a moment I almost pulled out the document. Almost. But instinct stopped me. Not here. Not like this. Then we move carefully, I said instead. We gather everything we can, and when the time comes we make sure the truth cannot be ignored. She nodded. Where do we start? Tomorrow, I said, you go back to work like nothing has changed. Her expression tightened. And you... I keep driving, I said. That's it. For now. She exhaled slowly. I don't like this. You're not supposed to, I replied. That means you're paying attention. We stood there for a moment, the city lights reflecting off the glass towers around us. Then she asked the question that had been waiting since the beginning. George, she said, why do I feel like you're not telling me everything? I looked at her, at the determination in her eyes, at the fear she was trying not to show, at the quiet strength she didn't even realize she carried. Because you're not ready yet. Because the truth is heavier than you think. Because once you know it, there is no going back. But I didn't say any of that. Because, I answered simply, timing matters. She studied my face, searching for something deeper. Then she nodded. All right, she said. But when the time comes, you tell me everything. I gave a small, tired smile.
When the time comes, I said, you'll be the first to know. We went our separate ways that night. She returned to her apartment with questions she could not yet answer. I drove home with answers I was not yet ready to reveal. But as I sat alone in my study, staring at the locked cabinet where the golden share certificate rested, one truth became impossible to ignore.
Nathan Hamilton was not the only one preparing for the board meeting. Someone else inside Carter and Hamilton Industries was already hunting for the same power I held. And unlike me, they were not trying to protect the company. The morning of the shareholder meeting arrived with a kind of stillness that did not feel natural. Chicago was quiet under a grey sky, the kind that presses down on buildings and makes everything seem heavier than it is. I arrived earlier than any driver was required to. I wanted to see the building before the noise began. Carter and Hamilton headquarters stood exactly as it always had, glass, steel, and reflection. But something about it felt different now. Not broken, not yet, but fragile. Inside the lobby was already being prepared for media presence. Cameras were being tested. Reporters stood near the entrance speaking in low voices about the historic acquisition that was expected to be announced within hours. Historic. That was one way to describe it. Emily arrived shortly after I did. She was dressed more formally than usual, her posture tighter, her expression carefully controlled, but I could see the tension in her hands. She walked toward me without hesitation. "It's happening today," she said. "I know, I verified everything last night," she continued. "The golden share is still valid under corporate law. The language is airtight. If we present it properly, the board cannot ignore it." "Good. But there's a problem," she added. "There's always a problem." She lowered her voice. "They moved the meeting time forward by almost 2 hours." I nodded slowly. "They're trying to limit interference." "Yes," she said, "and security has been increased. I tried to access the legal records again this morning. My credentials were flagged." That didn't surprise me. "They're closing the doors," I said. "They know something is coming." She looked at me directly. "George, we don't have much time." No, we didn't. For a moment we stood there in silence, surrounded by people who believed they were about to witness a celebration. Then she said the words I had been expecting. "Tell me now." I looked at her. "The truth," she said. "You said when the time came I'd be the first to know." This is that moment. She was right. There are moments in life when hesitation becomes a form of betrayal. This was one of them. I reached into my coat slowly. Her eyes followed the movement, and then I placed it in her hands. The golden share certificate. For a brief second she didn't react. Then she looked down. Her breath stopped. "George," she whispered. Her fingers trembled as she traced the signature at the bottom of the document. "George Carter," she read. Then she looked up at me. "You," I nodded. "Yes. You're the owner," she said. "Yes. You've been the owner this entire time." "Yes." The weight of that truth settled over her like something physical. "And you've been driving him," she said quietly. "Listening to everything. Watching everything." "Yes." "Why didn't you stop this sooner?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was human. Because I needed to know whether the company was being tested or destroyed, I answered. "And now I know." She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Then she opened them again, sharper this time. "Then we stop it," she said. I allowed myself the smallest smile. "That's the plan." The boardroom doors opened shortly after 9. Executives entered first, then investors, then legal teams. Nathan Hamilton arrived last. He walked in with confidence, the kind that comes from believing you have already won. I drove him that morning. He didn't recognize me, not really. He gave instructions, checked his phone, complained about the press coverage. At one point he adjusted his tie and said, "By this afternoon this company will finally move into the future." I said nothing. Because sometimes silence is not weakness, sometimes it is patience. Inside the boardroom the atmosphere was electric. Anticipation, excitement, tension, all layered together under the surface of polite conversation. Emily took her place near the legal counsel table. I remained near the back of the room. A driver. Invisible. Nathan stepped forward once everyone was seated. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today marks a defining moment for Carter and Hamilton Industries." He spoke well. I'll give him that. Confident, clear, convincing. He described the Blackridge acquisition as an opportunity, a transformation, a necessary evolution. He talked about growth, efficiency, global expansion. He did not mention layoffs. He did not mention closures. He did not mention the people who would lose everything. When he finished, the room applauded. Then he nodded toward Victor Lang, who stood to finalize the presentation. "This agreement has been reviewed by all necessary parties," Victor said. Upon board approval, the acquisition process will begin immediately. Emily looked at me. It was time. Nathan raised his hand. All in favour. Objection. The word cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned. Emily was standing. Nathan's expression shifted from confidence to irritation. Ms. Foster, he said, this acquisition cannot proceed. She continued, her voice steady, despite the tension. Not without addressing a foundational legal authority embedded within the company's original charter. This acquisition cannot proceed, she continued, her voice steady, despite the tension. Not without addressing a foundational legal authority embedded within the company's original charter. Murmurs spread across the room. Victor frowned. What authority? He asked. Emily stepped forward. The golden share. Silence. Real silence this time. Nathan laughed. That's not relevant, he said. Those documents are ceremonial at best.
They are legally binding, Emily replied, and they grant absolute veto power over any decision that violates the company's founding mission. Victor's expression darkened. Who holds this share? He demanded. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she turned slightly, toward me. That was the moment everything changed. I stepped forward slowly. No rush, no drama, just truth moving into the light. Nathan frowned. Why is the driver walking toward the table? He asked. No one answered.
Because they were watching, waiting, trying to understand. I reached the centre of the room, and then without a word I placed the golden share certificate on the table. The sound it made was small, but the impact was not. Victor stepped closer immediately, his eyes scanning the document. The legal counsel leaned in. One by one faces shifted. Recognition, shock, disbelief. Nathan's voice came out tighter than before. What is this? He demanded. I met his eyes.
This, I said calmly, is the authority you forgot to look for. The room held its breath. And for the first time since he became chairman, Nathan Hamilton realized he was no longer in control. No one spoke for several seconds. In a boardroom built for decisions, silence had never felt so loud.
Victor Lang was the first to move. He lifted the document carefully, his eyes scanning every line with the precision of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at and exactly what it could destroy. This is authentic, he said quietly. One of the senior legal counsels leaned in, adjusting his glasses, reading faster now. Yes, he confirmed, it's enforceable. The language is clear. Absolute veto authority tied to founding mission protections. Murmurs rippled across the table. Nathan did not move at first. He simply stared at me, not as a driver, not anymore, but as something he had failed to see. This is ridiculous, he said finally, his voice sharp. Who are you? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked around the room, at the board members who had built their careers under policies William and I had written, at the executives who had once promised to protect the company's people, at the younger faces who had never known what Carter and Hamilton was meant to be. Then I spoke. My name, I said calmly, is George Carter. The reaction was not explosive. It was slower, more unsettling. Recognition spreading from one face to another. A board member near the end of the table leaned forward. Carter, he whispered. As in, yes, I said. Nathan's expression changed. Not confusion, not disbelief. Something sharper. You're dead, he said. I almost smiled.
No, I replied. I retired. A few quiet laughs broke the tension, but they faded quickly, because the reality settling into that room was far heavier than any misunderstanding. Victor placed the phone on the table in any misunderstanding. Victor placed the document back on the table. Mr. Carter, he said more carefully now, if you are indeed the holder of this golden share, you understand the implications of what you're doing. I do. You're attempting to block a legally structured acquisition supported by the board.
I'm preventing a violation of the company's founding principles, I corrected. Nathan stepped forward. This company doesn't belong to you anymore, he said. You gave that up when you left. I met his gaze. I gave up control. I said, not responsibility. That's not how business works. That's exactly how this business was built. His jaw tightened. This is emotional, he said, turning slightly toward the board. Sentimental interference from someone who hasn't been involved in operations for decades. Emily stood. This is legal authority, she said firmly. Not sentiment. Nathan ignored her. This deal increases shareholder value, he continued. It positions the company for global expansion. It ensures long-term competitiveness. At what cost? I asked quietly. He didn't answer, so I did. 800 jobs in the first phase, I said. 3 facilities closed. Safety inspections reduced. Pension obligations restructured. The room shifted. Several board members looked at each other. That's not accurate, Nathan said quickly. Isn't it? I asked. Victor said nothing. That was answer enough. You want growth, I continued. But you're measuring it in numbers that ignore the people who built this company. Nathan's voice hardened. This isn't a charity.
No, I agreed.
It's a responsibility. He took a step closer. You don't understand the market anymore. And you don't understand the company you're trying to sell, I replied. That landed. Harder than anything else. Because deep down he knew it was true. Victor cleared his throat. Let's return to the legal matter, he said. Mr. Carter, are you formally invoking the golden share? Every eye in the room turned toward me. This was the moment, not the dramatic reveal, not the confrontation. This, the decision. I thought about William, about the warehouse, about the promise we had made. I thought about Linda Parker choosing between retirement and her husband's medical care, about Thomas Reed forced out for protecting safety standards, about Denise whose sister lost her scholarship, about every person who had been reduced to a number on a spreadsheet. Then I answered, yes. The word settled into the room like a final verdict. I am formally exercising my authority as the holder of the golden share, I said, and I am vetoing the proposed acquisition by Blackridge Capital. Silence again. But this time it wasn't confusion, it was impact. Victor closed his portfolio slowly. The deal cannot proceed under these conditions, he said. Nathan turned sharply. You can't just... I can, Victor interrupted. The authority is valid. The veto is binding. Nathan looked at the board. Overrule it, he said. There must be a way. The senior legal counsel shook his head. Not without amending the founding charter, he said, and that would require the golden shareholders' consent. Nathan looked back at me. For the first time since this began, he looked uncertain. You're making a mistake, he said. You're holding the company back. I stepped closer. No, I said quietly. I'm holding it together. His expression shifted again. Not anger, not frustration.
Something deeper, something closer to realization. You've been here, he said slowly, watching all of this. Yes. As a driver. Yes. And you said nothing. I listened, I corrected, why he asked. That question mattered more than he realized, because it wasn't about the deal, it was about him. I wanted to see who you would become, I said. The room stilled, and he asked. I held his gaze. You still have time to decide that.
For a moment, something in his expression softened, just slightly. Then it disappeared. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed. It isn't. Victor gathered his documents. The acquisition is suspended, he said. Blackridge will reassess its position. One by one board members began to stand. Conversations broke out in low voices. Plans were already changing. But I remained where I was. Because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something harder. Nathan didn't leave immediately. He stayed near the table, staring at the document, at my name, at the authority he had dismissed. Finally he spoke again. What happens now, he asked. I looked around the room, at the company we had built, at the people who still believed in it. Then I answered. Now, I said, we decide what this company is supposed to be. And for the first time, that decision was no longer his alone. The boardroom did not empty the way it normally did.
There was no clean conclusion. No formal adjournment, no confident closing statements. Instead, people moved in fragments, small groups forming, breaking apart, whispering, recalculating. Power had shifted, and no one knew yet where it would settle. I remained standing near the table, my hand resting lightly on the back of a chair that had once belonged to William. I had not intended to stand there, but something about that position felt appropriate. Nathan had not moved either. He stood on the opposite side of the table, staring at the golden share certificate, as if it might disappear if he looked away. It didn't. Eventually he spoke. Everyone out, he said. The room hesitated. Now, he added more firmly. One by one people left. Victor Lang closed his portfolio and exited without another word. The legal team followed. Board members exchanged uncertain glances but obeyed. Emily lingered. Nathan looked at her. You too. She hesitated, then looked at me. I gave her a small nod. She left. The door closed, and suddenly it was just the two of us. Chairman and driver. Grandson and something else. Nathan walked slowly around the table until he stood directly across from me. Up close, I could see the strain beneath his composure. The confidence he had carried into this room was still there, but it was cracked now. You've been watching me, he said. Yes. Judging me. No, I replied, understanding you.
He let out a short, humorless breath. That's worse. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question I had been waiting for. Why didn't my grandfather tell me about you? I considered the answer carefully. Because he wanted you to become something on your own, I said. Not because of him, and not because of me. Nathan shook his head. That's not an answer. It's the truth. He turned away, running a hand through his hair.
He trusted me, Nathan said. He believed I could lead this company. He did, I said. Then why would he give that kind of power to someone else? I stepped forward slightly. He didn't give it to someone else. I said. He gave it to the person he believed would protect the company when leadership failed. Nathan turned back toward me. You think I failed? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked him a question. When you decided to sell the company, I said, did you think about the people who built it? He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I thought about survival, he said finally, about competition, about growth. When you decided to sell the company, I said, did you think about the people who built it? He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I thought about survival, he said finally, about competition, about growth, and the people they're part of the system. No, I said quietly. They are the system. He looked at me, frustration rising again. You don't understand how things work now, and you don't understand how they worked before I replied.
We stood there separated by more than just a table, by time, by choices, by everything that had happened since William and I stood in that first warehouse. Nathan's voice softened slightly. I was trying to make it stronger. He said, I know. Then why does it feel like you're tearing it down? Because strength built without integrity does not last. Because growth without purpose becomes destruction. Because leadership without responsibility becomes power.
But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said something simpler. Because you forgot what it was built for. The words stayed with him. I could see it. Not as a sudden realization, but as something uncomfortable. Something he didn't want to face but couldn't ignore anymore. After a long moment, he asked quietly, what happens to me now? It was not the question of a chairman. It was the question of a man who had just lost certainty. That depends, I said, on what you choose to do next. He let out a slow breath. I don't have control anymore. That's not the same as having no influence, I said. He looked at me, searching. For the first time since this started, people will be watching what you do, I continued. Not what you say, not what you promise, what you do. And if I get it wrong again, then you learn, I said. Or someone else steps in. He nodded slowly. The arrogance was still there, but something else had joined it.
Awareness. Outside the boardroom, the company was already changing. Over the next few days, the
Official announcements began. The Blackridge acquisition was cancelled, the restructuring plan was suspended, an internal review committee was formed. Wrongfully dismissed employees were contacted. Some returned, some didn't. But the effort mattered. Safety inspections were immediately restored to their original standards. The scholarship program was reinstated. Community partnerships reopened. Not because of me, but because once the truth is exposed, it becomes harder to ignore. Emily Foster was promoted to general counsel within a week. She didn't celebrate. She worked. Late nights, long hours, making sure the company could not quietly drift back into the same mistakes. Nathan held a company-wide meeting 3 days after the board session. I watched it from the back of the auditorium, still in my driver's uniform.
He stood on stage, no script in his hands. I made decisions without understanding the full impact, he said. And I didn't listen when people tried to tell me. There were no excuses, no deflection, just truth. I can't undo everything that's happened, he continued, but I can choose what happens next. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes that's where change begins. A week later, I made my own decision. I requested a final meeting with the board. This time I didn't stand in the back. I sat at the table, not as a chairman, not as an executive, but as what I had always been, a builder. I will not be taking any formal leadership position, I told them. There were objections, concerns, even offers. I declined them all. This company doesn't need another person in control, I said. It needs protection. I placed a new set of documents on the table, an employee legacy trust. The golden share would be transferred into it. No single individual, no chairman, no board, no family member would ever control it again. The authority would belong to a rotating group of independent trustees, including legal oversight and employee representation. A system, not a person. That way, I said no one will ever be able to do what almost happened again. The room was quiet. Then slowly they agreed. My last day as a driver came quietly. No announcement, no ceremony. At least that's what I expected. But when I walked toward the front entrance that morning, something felt different. The doors opened, and people were already there, lined along the walkway. Employees, dozens at first, then hundreds, factory workers, receptionists, managers, custodians, engineers, people I had driven, people I had spoken to, people who had no idea who I was until now. They stood on both sides forming a path, and as I walked forward they began to applaud, not loudly, not dramatically.
but steadily, respectfully, like something being returned to its rightful place. At the end of the path, a familiar figure stood waiting. Nathan. He walked forward as I approached, not as a chairman, as a man learning. He opened the car door himself, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Mr. Carter, thank you." I nodded, not because I needed the words, but because I understood what it took for him to say them. I sat in the driver's seat one last time. The engine started with the same familiar hum, the building reflected in the rearview mirror. But it looked different now, not because it had changed overnight, but because it had been reminded of what it was meant to be. As I drove away, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally letting it go. Not to one person, not to one family, but to the people who had always carried it forward. And for the first time in a long time, that felt right.
When I look back on everything that happened, I realize the most powerful truth is also the simplest one. Real leadership is not about control, it's about responsibility. Titles can be given, power can be inherited, but integrity that has to be chosen over and over again, especially when it's inconvenient. George never needed to prove who he was through status or recognition. He proved it through quiet consistency, through the way he treated people when no one was watching, through the sacrifices he made long before anyone applauded him, and through the courage to stand up when it mattered most. And perhaps the most powerful part of his story is this: he didn't fight to take something back. He fought to protect what should never have been lost in the first place.
In life, many of us will be underestimated at some point. We may be ignored, dismissed, or even disrespected, and in those moments it's easy to react with anger or try to prove ourselves immediately. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait, observe, and let the truth reveal itself at the right time. Because dignity does not come from how others see you, it comes from how you choose to stand even when no one is standing with you.
This story also reminds us that success without values is fragile. A company, a family, or even a life built only on profit, speed, or ambition will eventually collapse under its own emptiness. But when something is built on respect, purpose, and care for others, it can survive even the hardest tests. So I want to ask you something. If you were in George's position, would you have done the same? Would you have stayed silent long enough to understand the truth, or would you have revealed your power the moment you were disrespected? And what about Nathan? Do you believe people like him can truly change when they are forced to face the consequences of their choices? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Share your perspective in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told, and maybe somewhere inside them you'll find a piece of your own story too. Thank you for being here.